Not sure whether there's going to be many more people joining us. Not sure whether you guys would mind to come to the front so that we don't feel lonely. Trying to compare with the other session who has the many more participants. Okay, I've got a thumbs up for us to start. Assalamualaikum, very good afternoon to everyone. I hope everyone has had a very engaging, entertaining session for today and even for the last 2 days, right? Now we are on to the last session for the whole conference. I was told saving the best for last, so no pressure for the panelists. So my name is Sharizal. I'm an assurance partner with Ernst & Young Malaysia. I lead our assurance, wealth and asset management sector. I'll be your moderator for today. For this session, the focus is really to provide an implementation-focused view on asset management sector innovations and approaches to transition. There's a couple of key outcomes that we hope we're going to gather from the panelists. The panelists are meant to share the evolving role of asset managers in supporting global transition with innovative investment strategies. We'll also be looking at the challenges in the sustainability transition and the strategy to address. We'll probably also hear some of the skills and knowledge required to implement sector-specific innovations, as well as some sharing on the cutting-edge solutions and tools to remain agile and effective. We'll also hear on the synergies for holistic transitions, collaborations between asset managers, financial technologies, and regulatory authorities. In achieving these objectives, quite honored to have the presence of our esteemed panelists today, both physically and virtually. I'm not sure whether our panelists joining virtually is already on. Okay. Hi, Serena. Hi, Jono. Apologies for the wait. We're hoping to fill up the room, but this is the best that we can do so far. So let's just start. Right. I don't think the panelists need any introduction, but I wouldn't be doing my job as moderator nevertheless. Let me just give them a quick introduction. On my left, joining me physically here on the floor is Miss Angelia Chinsha. She's the CEO Singapore, Head of Distribution Southeast Asia, BNP Paribas Asset Management. I think in her role, pretty apt that we have her today, that she drives the sustainable solutions and delivering sustainable returns in the region for BNP Paribas Asset Management. I think in her role more than 15 years ago, she's also instrumental in establishing the practice here in Malaysia and leading the CEO later. And I think outside her role, she also supports the Lost Food Project, aiding the underprivileged. Welcome and thanks for joining us today, Ms. Angelia. We also have Encik Muazzam Muhammad, the Senior Vice President and Head of Investment Stewardship for Pemodalan Nasional Berhad, or known as PNB. In his role, he's spearhead the PNB goal in achieving a net zero portfolio by 2050. He also oversee the PNB's Malaysian ringgit 10 billion allocation for green and transition asset by 2030. As well as PNB's focus on labour rights, CEO and board representation and promoting voting transparency. I think he also serves as a non-executive board member for Tenaga Nasional Berhad and Goodyear Malaysia Berhad. Welcome, Encik Muazzam. And joining us virtually, we have on the left, Ms. Serena Lee, who is the Manager of Investor Practice, Asia Investor Group on Climate Change, AIGCC for short. I think in her role, she manages a collaborative investor program in Asia, focusing on integrating climate consideration into investment portfolio. Her responsibility also includes supporting Investor Climate Action Plan, or ICAP for short, which is the subject of her sharing or presentation later. coordinating AIGCC's energy transition and Paris-aligned investment working groups, and co-managing the Asia Utilities Engagement Program aligned with the Climate Action 100+. She's also an advisor to the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, Mainstream Transition Finance Workstream on behalf of AIGCC. Welcome, Serena. And last but not least, we have Jono Broom, Associate Director, Client Advisory Team for Morningstar Analytics. I understand that he has recently moved to his current role to oversee the Asia Pacific Client Advisory Team after 8 years in the United Kingdom. He worked as the lead advisor for some of Morningstar Sustainalytics' largest clients internationally, and has spent the last 2 years focusing on Sustainalytics' commercial strategy for data, on EU regulatory requirements such as Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulations, or SFDR for short, and the EU taxonomy. I hope the participant can join me in giving a warm welcome to all our esteemed panelists. Right, for today's session, we've got 2 hours, but that's cut short because we are starting much later. I think each of the panelists will have a sharing presentation for about 10 to 15 minutes. We'll then have a round of Q&A with the panelists in reference to the presentation that they've made, and we'll end with 15 or 20 minutes of audience Q&A. For the purpose of the audience Q&A, we are using the Slido deck where you can scan the QR code. Is that going to be shared now? It's not appearing. Okay. So do scan the QR code for you to post questions for our last section of the session later. Right. I think that's enough for me. I'm sure everyone can't wait to start to hear from our panelists. So to kickstart our session, I would like to pass the floor to Ms. Angelia to share on BNP Paribas Asset Management approach towards a sustainable transition. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Sharizad. All right, what an amazing 3 days we had, listening to so many experts about what we all need to do and the call to action by Raja Amil. Let me just share about, I think we've talked a lot the last 2 days, and I want to bring to you from the perspective of an asset manager, what we do at BNP Paribas Asset Management in terms of the role we play. We discussed a lot the last 2-3 days talking about the need to bring capital together to solve the problems that we have created ourselves, so that we can, move towards a low carbon emission economy or towards net zero. And again, we also talk a lot today on the biodiversity. So I also share with you what are the steps that BNP Paribas Asset Management has taken in terms of our commitment towards net zero, as well as on the biodiversity side. So if I can move to the next slide, maybe I would like to do a little bit of introduction about BNP Paribas Asset Management. If you do not know us, we are not a tennis ball manufacturer. I know some people think that we manufacture tennis ball because we sponsor tennis, but we are one of the largest asset management company, and we are backed by one of the strongest European bank, which is BNP Paribas. In terms of total assets that we manage about close to 530 billion euros of assets under management. And I mentioned being backed by one of the strongest and largest bank. The handsome gentleman there is my boss. He's the CEO of BNP Paribas Asset Management globally. If I can move to the next slide. I thought, maybe to share a little bit in terms of our leadership on sustainability, some of the recognition that we have. I think important for you to understand this as well, because part of what we've done in these 3 days is also sharing with all of you in your own personal journey in your organization on how you are going to move towards integrating ESG into your investments. So first, we are proud to be recognized by Share Action as ranked number 2 in terms of being a global responsible investment manager. Share Action is an NGO that actually look at the process of asset managers and true to labor in terms of what they do in terms of making sure that we are active in terms of making positive impact in the way we run our clients' investments and also the way we run our organization. So we are clearly recognized in terms of our leadership on sustainability, as well as advocate on a lot of the initiatives that you have also heard the last 3 days, such as PRI, TCFD, TNFD. Those are really initiatives that we are very active in. Second, also we are the first to basically launch a socially responsible fund in 2002. So in terms of a journey to sustainability, it has been more than 20 over years. And number three, I think the other one that I want to highlight is also in majority action, we are ranked number 1. And why we are ranked number 1 is our active stewardship engagement. And this is really very important if we want to make positive change, to be really active in terms of your engagement and your stewardship engagement with the companies that we invest in. So, we are actually one of the managers with the highest level of opposition to board. For example, if they do not have women in their board, we actually vote against the election of boards because they do not have female representation, or the business plans is not aligned to climate impact plans. And of course, in terms of the assets that we manage, more than almost 90% of the assets that we manage are already SFDR Article 8 and or Article 9 compliance. So these are regulation in Europe where they recognize the sustainability. So our funds, more than almost 90% of funds are already SFDR Article 8 or 9. If I can move to the next, and maybe to share with you all in terms of our sustainable investment journey since 2002. We like I mentioned, the first to launch a socially responsible investment in 2002. And in 2006, we became the founding signatory to the UN PRI, and I'm sure some of you here are already one of the signatories to the PRI. One of them is PNB, my co-speaker, who is part of the panelists representing PNB. And in 2012, we basically implemented the United Nations Global Compact principles and sector policies within the investments that we manage for our clients. 2015, we all heard a lot about the Montreal Carbon Pledge that's been discussed the past 2 days. We are also the signatory to the Montreal Carbon Pledge, and that means we are committed to aligning the portfolios of our investment to be in compliance in terms to the Montreal Carbon Pledge. 2018, as a group, we basically exclude our investment into tobacco companies. In terms of the bank, we also do not finance tobacco company. So that's a policy that we came out in 2018. In 2019, in terms of preparing our commitment to the Montreal Carbon Pledge and towards our commitment to net zero, we came out with new coal policy. We came out with policies on how we will continue to invest into companies, and they need to be in compliance to our coal policies. So that has been launched, and we also launched the Global Sustainability Strategy, where we share our roadmap on how we will integrate ESG into our investments, and I will also share with you the components of the Global Sustainability Strategy. 2020, we further enhance how we can do things better by creating our proprietary ESG scoring methodology. This is really very important because if we are to commit to those requirements that I mentioned earlier, we need to understand the companies that we invest in, and we actually have our proprietary score on how we score company in terms of the E, S, and the G. And in part of the scoring, we also ensure that we address diversity and inclusivity, and diversity voting policies are also launched in 2020. In 2021, we talked about this morning a lot about nature and biodiversity. I'm also proud to share in 2021, BNP Paribas Asset Management launched the Biodiversity Roadmap, and we also became the signatory to the Zero Asset Managers Alliance. So at BNP Paribas, we are the signatory to the GFANS. We are signatory to we are 3 signatories. The bank is a signatory to the Net Zero Banking Alliance. Our insurance business is also a signatory to the Net Zero Alliance, and as an asset manager, we are also a signatory to the Asset Managers Alliance. In 2022, which was last year, we launched our Net Zero Roadmap, and I will share with you our 10 steps in terms of our commitment to ensuring that we're able to achieve our net zero commitment. And we also tie up with Meta, which is a Danish fintech company, in terms of our ability to look further in the companies that we invest in looking at SDG fundamentals. 2023, which is this year, we are proud to be the founding member of Nature Action 100 that is aligned to the biodiversity roadmap that we have launched in 2021, and we feel it's important. Just like Climate Action 100, we also launched we are the founding member of the Nature Action 100. So let me share with you on the next slide in terms of our global sustainability strategy. In our global sustainability strategy, there are 6 pillars that we look at in terms of how our approach and how we integrate sustainability into our investment. The first approach is the ESG integration. We want to make sure all our investment teams integrate ESG, and we've done that, and it's validated on all the investment teams, from our equities capabilities to fixed income capabilities, including our private assets capabilities. Second, I mentioned about the importance of stewardship, voting engagement. Those are really important. We came up with policies on how we further enhance our stewardship engagement. It's good to see Serena as one of the panel. We work very closely with AIGCC as well in our engagement with some of the companies in the region working with AIGCC. Third, we actually incorporate responsible business conduct into the companies that we analyze, and what that means is that they need to be basically not just looking at the climate, E, S, and G, they need to be in compliance with the UN Global Compact principles, and also we have sector policies in terms of different sectors, from pulp and paper to agriculture, different sector policies. We have requirements including the coal policy. The fourth, importantly, is we feel it's important to have a forward-looking perspective. On that, we have the 3 E's, which are very important aspects of what we see as forward-looking perspectives. The first E is looking at energy transition. Second is on environmental issues. And the third E is basically on equality and inclusivity. The fifth pillar is looking at, we talk a lot today, the past 2 days, about the importance of channeling capital to support the issues that we have discussed the last 2 days. So we have also created products to ensure we channel capital to investment solutions for sustainability. So as an example, we have launched products like addressing energy transition. We have launched products on biodiversity. We also launched product that looks at also water. And these are actually, we've launched them in Malaysia recently, like Water Fund, Aqua, Global Climate Impact, Global Environment, and Energy Transition Fund. And I think 6, importantly, is while we advocate a lot in terms of what we need to achieve, I think internally it's also important that we walk the talk. So, we have, we ensure that our corporate practices and our disclosure should match or exceed the standards we expect from the entities of which we invest in. So those are also very clear kind of policies that we have in terms of what we do as a firm. So I talk about, the importance of having a proprietary ESG scoring. Why that? It's because we are all grappling in terms of the data that we have, the qualities of data. And for us to be able to also number one, to understand the companies that we invest in, we need to be able to score the companies that we invest in terms of the criteria that we look at. So our sustainability teams basically score more than 13,000 issues in terms of our coverage. And how we look at our ESG scoring is based on a sector relative approach. We assess ESG performance versus their comparable sector, as well as the geographical peers that those companies are operating. We also make sure that the carbon emission controversies are also scored on an absolute basis on the companies that we invest in. We have a stringent metric selection. On an average, we use about 37 metrics per sector, focusing on material and insightful metrics. And we also have a robust methodology that, based on the models that we created with our internal teams, which is our quantitative research group, which is part of our financial engineering team. And importantly, those are built with our investment teams. So these are communicated and work together with our investment team between our sustainability center and our investment teams. The importance of having these proprietary ESG scores is also why today, in terms of the products that we have and the funds that you can see, the fund fact sheet today actually have an ESG score as well as a carbon score. And our ability to do that is because we have the proprietary ESG score that we have, and having the ESG score also help us in our engagement with our clients or our companies that we invest in to help them in the journey to achieve the standards or the criteria that we need them to achieve in compliance with the EU taxonomy. Next, I wanted to share with you all also in terms of our commitment to net zero. I mentioned earlier we are a signatory to the Net Zero Asset Managers Alliance. And importantly is we have also basically list down the 10 steps for us to achieve how we go to achieve the net zero, our net zero journey. What I want to highlight here in terms of how many signatories are on here, there are 301 signatories, and I know certainly it's growing. And how much assets are actually involved? We are talking about almost 60 trillion US dollars of assets. Why this is really important is because we talk about, if they are all net zero signatory, that means when they invest in the companies, whether be it developed or emerging markets, they need to be in compliance with the taxonomies that's been issued. So there is a need, even in this region, to accelerate to ensure they are in compliance with their climate plans as well as their commitment towards net zero. So how we do this is we certainly will partner with our large asset owners in terms of working with them on their decarbonization goals. We have already set targets in terms of the assets that we manage to be in line with net zero. And we are committed to review these targets every 5 years, and we will work to increase the proportionate AUM covered until that we will achieve 100% of our assets to be in compliance to net zero. Okay, so this is basically our climate roadmap that I wanted to share with you on how we're going to achieve the net zero by 2050. I mentioned that we have launched our net zero roadmap in 2021. We have tightened our coal policy and we also have enhanced our proxy voting policies to ensure we are able to have bigger influence with the companies that we invest in to help us to also in this journey to achieve the targets that we want to achieve. What we plan to do is in 2023, we will launch net zero investment products. It's actually on the works. It's coming out really soon. And we will also continue to engage with companies, with policymakers, as well as with regulators and as well as the companies that we invest in. In 2025 will be our first net zero milestones. We intend to cut our carbon footprint of our funds by 30% versus the targets in 2019. And in 2030, we intend to basically cut the carbon footprint of our funds by 50%. And we want to make sure 60% of the corporate holdings are either net zero achieving, aligned, or aligning under our NZAAA framework. By 2040, we would like to see 100% of the corporate holdings in our portfolio will be either net zero achieving, aligned, or aligning. And 2050, we should be able to reach a net zero portfolio emission. So at this moment, as I mentioned, we won't be able to achieve 100% because there's still a lot of work to be done, and that's why engagement is really important. What we have committed today is that at least 50% of BNP Paribas Asset Management assets under management must be at least SFDR 8 and 9, and our clients' mandates of funds to apply on the RBC policy, excluding investments. Currently, we exclude investments in sovereigns, agencies, and funds. Sovereigns and agencies, as well as some of our ETF, because of the synthetic replication, we are not able to exclude certain companies. So that's why we are not able to say 100% of our assets under management will be able to be in compliance with SFDR 8 or 9, but we are working to enhance our ESG scoring methodology to be able to improve or increase that allocation. So I talk about our commitment to net zero and what are the 10 steps. So I want to quickly share that with you given the time that I have. So what we want to do is basically we address them in 3 pillars. One is on our investments, how we do that. The second one is on our stewardship, how we're going to do that. And the third one is on our operations. So I'll look first in terms of investments, how we are going to achieve the net zero targets that I talk about by 2050. So I mentioned earlier, first step is to reduce the carbon footprint of our in-scope corporate investments, that again looking at scope 1 and scope 2. We want to achieve 30% of that by 2025, 50% by 2030, and 100% by 2050 or earlier. We will align our portfolio with net zero requirements. So that means 60% of our in-scope investment to be net zero achieving, aligned or aligning by 2030, and 100% by 2040. We will exit coal. So currently I mentioned we have a coal policy, so we have not exit coal yet. So we are working and investing in companies and utility companies and engaging together with AIGCC on matters like this. But our coal policies will become more and more stringent through the years. So by 2030, in line with the European Union and the OECD countries, we will exit thermal coal activities and power generators that is dependent on coal. We will make sure the fourth step is to invest in climate solutions. We will substantially increase our climate and environmentally themed investments. I mentioned, we talk about the need to channel capital to the role we play in terms of supporting companies that are coming out with solutions to address carbon emissions. So we have teams like energy transition funds. So those are teams that make sure that capital is channeled into solutions, technology solutions that is addressing what we need to achieve the 2050 targets. So we will continue to increase the type of product or sustainable thematic products into the market, so that we will bring capital to support innovative companies in the capital market. 5, we will importantly engage with our clients as well as regulators and policy makers. I mentioned many times we can't walk this journey alone. We have to walk it with all of you, and it's amazing to see the great passion that we've seen at JC3. So this is precisely what we need to do to continue to engage and share knowledge with our partners to bring them to this journey and let us walk towards a net zero investment by 2050. So stewardship is the other important commitment. We will vote for climate action, and I've said that we have voted against companies that do not have climate policies in place. So we will vote for climate action. That means we will signal our expectation. That's why we want to be very honest in sharing with the companies that we invest in our expectation. And we will signal expectation that companies need to report on their carbon footprint, and the world's largest greenhouse gas emitters, we need to set ambition on how to achieve net zero by 2050 or sooner. We will vote in favor of thoughtful shareholder proposals and submit proposals of our own to help them in accelerating their corporate action on climate change. We will engage with companies on net zero, so we will implement an engagement strategy that is consistent with our ambition for all assets under management to achieve net zero emission by 2050 or sooner. We are already identifying the clients who are committed to net zero or have ambitions to achieve net zero by 2050, to work with them on this journey and what they need from us to help them to integrate what is needed to achieve those timelines. we will advocate for net zero by 2050 aligned climate policies. We will play a very active role in advocating for net zero aligned policies, and we will seek to ensure that any relevant direct and indirect policy advocacy we undertake is supportive of achieving global net zero emission by 2050 or sooner. Lastly, we need to walk the talk, as I mentioned earlier. We will reduce our operational emission footprint ourselves. We will continue to offset our operational emissions, and we will improve energy efficiency and use more green energy in our businesses. And we will report our progress through TCFD aligned reporting, which has been discussed. So a lot of work that needs to be done, and I think the journey has started, and we will accelerate this further. This is our ambition, near term as well as mid-term, and also on the longer term. So in terms of the near term, it's important to have a sustainable culture. We translate our strong focus on CSR and sustainability culture to our external brand. Today we heard on the NGOs on and talking about giving holidays for people to support charities. I'm pleased to announce at BNP Paribas we have what we call a 1 million hours to help. We actually give additional leave of 1 day to encourage staff to support whatever charities, or we will create activities for our staff to participate in charitable or environmental works, and up to 5 days they can take in terms of on top of their current leave, up to 5 days on this in terms of CSR activities. I mentioned we will continue to enhance our bold stewardship. We maintain and build our position as a stewardship leader with robust and credible policies and outcomes. So how we vote, those policies are actually publicly available. So if you want those information, you can download them. If you don't have, please look for Daniel. He's based in Malaysia. He will be happy to share with you our policies, which are public. We will build our focus on public advocacy. The work that we are doing with JC3, this is precisely what we are doing together with the regulators, with our friends in the financial institutions in terms of building greater enhancement on the public advocacy. We will enhance collaboration with investment teams, working closely with our investment teams and our sustainability center. We talk importantly, what we need to achieve need to be science-led and need to be transparent. We're not just doing this blindly in terms of how and where and how we will be able to achieve that. Those will be underpinned by science-led data, and our methodologies will be based on robust scientific and academic models, and with data and control processes. We will communicate clear proof points on detail on our approach to ESG, on our ESG integration, on our SFDR of our funds, our commitment to net zero, and the impact of the investments that we have. On a midterm, we are investors in emerging markets, and we know the challenge is the pace of the acceleration of emerging market companies in achieving the net zero agenda. So we will continue to use our large and growing presence in emerging market and Asia as a positive force towards achieving a net zero sustainable and equitable transformation. And we want to make sure it is a tangible impact. So we want the clients to have a tangible impact. This will involve framing the impact investment to meet this demand in a credible way, and we are working with our partners in terms of creating products to ensure capital is channeled to support those programs. Internal priorities, we talk about data issues. We want to ensure that we are able to have high quality data, multifaceted data on ESG scores, carbon, SFDR indicators, SDGs. We will continue to enhance these that we have already illustrated to our clients through our product fund sheets. And we want to make sure this will be available to meet the range of use cases, measurement, regulatory alignment, external reporting, fund, and firm-wide. Product development, I talk about new products that we will continue to bring to market. Recently, we have actually acquired a majority stake on IWC, which is the International Woodland Companies. We talk about forestry funds, agricultural funds. Again, this is some of the activities that we will be committed to channeling capital to support the net zero agenda. Education, we are committed to knowledge sharing. We have a lot on our investment academy, and we partner with GRASFI and leverage this in terms of bringing those educational white papers to our clients as well as internal. And we actually empower our staff to get certification. So our staff are required to get certification either from PRI, CFA, or we work with actually the University of Cambridge on a program for BNP Paribas Group. We want to make sure we are able to communicate and share that. So marketing and communications is really important. We ensure that our internal and external marketing and communication engine is highly focused and aligned to what we want to achieve. We will use the 3 E's. The 3 E's I mentioned is energy transition, environmental, as well as equality and inclusiveness to explain our approach and to communicate the progress on the 3 E's. We will leverage our internal communication to build and nurture a sustainable culture and also our employee value proposition. So lastly, before I end, we'll talk a lot about how to channel those capitals. So what we've done is basically broke down to these themes, the importance of energy transition, which is towards net zero. We want to make sure that we're supporting companies that are coming up with solutions that address energy transition. That also include on our private asset side. On the environmental sustainability, we have, like example, the biodiversity fund. On the ETF, we have the circular economy ETF or the blue economy ETF. Those again are channeling capital to addressing the environmental sustainability. On the equality, inclusive growth, we actually have an inclusive growth fund where we invest in companies that have policies on addressing equality and inclusive, and we believe companies that have those policies will outperform the market, and they certainly have proven that. The other thing we talk about, health and wellness. So we also make sure that that we are investing in teams like this, which are very important since COVID, and we also seen the advancement of medical technology. There are opportunities for investors to look at teams like that. So in a nutshell, those are what we will discuss more in the Q&A and our panel session. So I'll leave you with this slide, and I will happy to have our robust discussion later. Thank you.
Thanks, Angelia. I think it was really comprehensive, very enlightening. Although you pretty much exceeded the 15 minutes, I couldn't stop you there. I think I've taken a few points. Apologies for my ignorance. Pleasantly surprised to see that your journey actually started more than 20 years ago, 2002, the issuance of your SRI fund. So pretty impressive. And I'm hearing correctly, pretty comprehensive scoring framework as well. 13,000 issuers globally done internally. I think in your roadmap 2021-2050, you do mention about the launch of net zero investment products. I think if you had a chance later on, maybe we can expand further on that. And I think one point on your 2022-2025 ambitions, internally focusing on data, I think high quality is given, but the fact that it needs to be multifaceted, really covering the different needs of various international stakeholders. Perfect, very brilliant. Thank you so much. I think our next speaker, if I can pass on to Encik Muazzam to share on PNB's approach to decarbonize its portfolio. The floor is yours, Encik Muazzam. Thanks.
Thanks, Sharizal. Do you need me to present in like 20 seconds? I can just say 80-90% of what BNP Paribas is doing is similar to what we're doing. Okay, Assalamualaikum and good afternoon, everyone. Firstly, thank you to the organizers for inviting PNB to be part of this conference. I think it's a very timely and important one. So today, I'm going to touch a little bit, maybe introduce PNB a little bit, and then I will share our net zero portfolio target and what the progress that we made so far, and then also touch on labor rights. So basically, PNB, today we are about 341 billion in terms of assets under management. That's roughly, if you just take on the equity part, it's roughly about 9 to 10% of Bursa Malaysia, and the rest are divided across other asset classes. So we serve about 15 million unit holders, and to date, over the last 40 odd years, we've distributed about 236 billion in terms of income distribution. So we are somewhat a big part of corporate Malaysia, and you may know some of the household names that you see. Probably PNB's name is there somewhere, either among the top 5 shareholders. So today we have 17 funds investing globally. Our SAA today, roughly about 60% equities, 20% fixed income, and then 5 and 5 in real estate and private equity, and balance is cash. So a big leap that we have taken this past 2 years is to embrace ESG. So when we began to look into our own framework on how we approach it, we were guided by these 5 key principles. Number one, we believe that ESG drives long-term value. Being a long-term investor ourselves, we see that ESG will really shape how the corporates will not just perform but behave in the future. In terms of being quite a sizable investor in Malaysia, we recognize that we need to be a responsible leader as well, and we acknowledge that we have a huge role to play when it comes to championing sustainability. And then number 3, in terms of having, nobody can do this alone, especially on stewardship. It really needs collaboration and working together, despite how big or small one is, which is why we believe that collective action and partnership is equally important. Number 4, of course, if we are to preach about sustainability, PNB ourselves must change, which is why we are embracing ESG. And last but not least, I think one of the most important factors that guides us is that we strive for progress instead of perfection. So ESG, as everybody knows, it's an evolving topic. It's very fluid, and every other day new standards are coming into play. But again, for us, no matter how difficult or how uncertain things are, we strive for progress. So I'm going to skip this, jump straight to slide 6 in the interest of time. So slide 6 shows an outline of our 10 ESG commitments. So the updates that you see here are what we have done so far. So on the environmental side, we have 3 commitments. The first one is to be a net zero enterprise by 2025. My team told me that the only other company with an ambitious plan like this is Netflix. So we have quite an ambitious one. So in terms of how we are changing as an organization, of course, we are undergoing training and then roadshows within the organization itself. We have launched a program called R2O, Reduce, Remove, or Offset, whereby any of our operations and efforts that contribute to carbon emissions, we will try to reduce it as much as we can. Any action or steps that we can remove, we remove altogether. And last but not least, for any hard to abate emissions, we will purchase the right type of offsets. And then on the portfolio side, perhaps the biggest chunk of all, which is about 99% of our emissions. I'll share the numbers later. So this is where the bulk of the work will go, i.e. how do we decarbonize our own portfolio. As I mentioned earlier, 60% of it is actually in equities and largely in listed companies in Malaysia. I'll share a little bit more later on that part. And number 3, to decarbonize our portfolio, of course, the second lever is to start investing in green and transition assets. I will show later a summary of the taxonomy that we have created to guide our various investment teams. And then on the social side, there's a living wage policy that we've implemented internally. We have launched our labor rights policy in December of last year. Internally, we have set a 40% target to have women in leadership. It's already at 36%, but we think that we can go higher at 40%. And then in terms of our social investments, we are now developing our social investments framework. On the governance side, triple bottom line, people, profits, and planet. So we do assess the effectiveness of the boards and the mission critical positions of our investee companies that guides the people who do we appoint on boards. In terms of transparency in voting, we publish our voting decisions ahead of time. We try to publish it 5 days or more before the actual EGM itself. We actually welcome companies to reach out or engage us if they see that our voting decisions are not what they seem or what they expect. And then last but not least is to disclose our progress based on the TCFD framework. So overall, our portfolio emissions and our enterprise total just under 12 million tons, but 99% of that comes from our finance emission, scope 3.15, and the balance as an enterprise, it totals about 28,000 tons. So you can see here in terms of the figures, PNB per employee basis, we are somewhat similar to banks, predominantly because we have branches as well. We have 32 branches across Malaysia, so maybe that's the reason why we follow more banks other than the other asset managers. In terms of our portfolio, we have baseline 85% of our AUM. So that's quite a big achievement by the team. The only asset class that we did not baseline was cash and some of the ETFs and funds. But overall, our PCAF score is 2.3, which is relatively good as well, given that a lot of the data are also disclosed by the companies themselves. So slide 8 shows the breakdown of our enterprise emissions. You can see here for scope 1 it's not that large. Scope 2 of course is the electricity that we purchase. But again, when we decided to walk the talk, we also measured our scope 3. So there are 7 categories here that you can see. And this has really given us good insight on how to decarbonize the company. So for instance, when you look at number 1 and 2, OPEX and CAPEX, that has really helped us to understand or try to identify what are the steps that we need to take as a company to lessen the carbon footprint of our operations and the way that we spend. Okay, and in terms of our aim to invest in green and transition assets, we've set a 10 billion target. I know it may not be large. It's 10 billion out of 341. It's about 3%. But again, we've done the calculation. We know that to reach net zero by 2050, the number will be bigger. But in the interim, by 2030, the target is about 10 billion. And internally, we looked at various taxonomies out there, from CCPT by Negara, and then SRI taxonomy and various other taxonomies as well. We decided to develop our own because we wanted to focus on areas that contribute to the energy transition particularly, which is why we focus on clean transport, green buildings, clean energy, and as well as AFOLU, agriculture, forestry, and other land use. So essentially, this is currently guiding our asset class teams on what opportunities that they need to look at when it comes to investments. So again, to underscore our commitment towards sustainability, effective 1st of October 2023, we revised our voting policy to include various new elements, particularly on the part of sustainability. So you can see here in the dark blue box, we have inserted some requirements that companies needs to follow. Companies must at least have a net zero ambition by the 1st of Jan 2025, net zero strategy a year later, and then they must also integrate ESG into their decision making. And also companies must not just address climate issues, but also biodiversity and labor. So you can read our full voting policy on our website. But again, we have already integrated ESG elements into our voting. Yeah, and then on the transparency part, we have already published our votes ahead of time. we've managed to do that by making the process a lot more streamlined, cloud-based, easier for the investment teams to decide on the voting decisions. But stay tuned. I think we are not resting yet on this. We will expand our efforts when it comes to transparency in voting. Okay, so given how big our portfolio is, there's a particular section that focuses just on this. This current slide shows our key targets when it comes to how do we achieve our net zero portfolio. So the first one is we are going to aim to reduce our carbon intensity by 30% by 2030. Second, 70% of our portfolio to have net zero targets by 2030 as well. And then comes the 10 billion target. And then on top of that, we have our commitment against greenfield thermal coal, and then commitment against deforestation, peat, and exploitation. So these are the four targets that will guide us in terms of how we decarbonize our current portfolio, and then how do we integrate ESG into decision making, and also guides our new investments going forward. So we benchmark ourselves against not just the domestic organizations, but also the global ones. So you can see here that a lot of the global firms and the banks in Malaysia already have net zero targets. And when it comes to how they created their interim targets, as you know, you can either aim to reduce your emissions, or you can also have a target to engage certain sectors, certain number of companies. And at the same time, in terms of green financing, a key topic for JC3, we want to play our role as well, hence the 10 billion target. And of course, the two other key ones will be on coal and deforestation. You can see here that we've tried to get all of the boxes ticked. So which is why we decided to go with the emissions reduction target just now, as well as the engagement-based targets. So the baselining exercise really helped us on how do we approach and decarbonize our existing investments. You can see here that 90% alone comes from our domestic holdings. And then in terms of which category of assets, it's predominantly domestic equities. And if you zoom in further, on the right-hand side, over 80% of emissions comes from just 4 sectors. So these are plantation, utilities, oil and gas, and construction. If you just add up the top 2, it's almost 70% actually. So which is why actually just engaging 2 companies alone can solve the bulk of our emissions. Again, one key question that we have, or what we get, is that how do we determine the credibility of a net zero ambition? So we were guided by NZIF, Net Zero Investment Framework, where it outlines 6 key elements that makes up a credible net zero plan. So I'm not going to go through in detail in the interest of time, but if you have any questions later, feel free to ask. And on the right-hand side is just a recap of the improvements, refinements that we've done with our voting guidelines. So a lot of work has been done, but a lot more work currently in the pipeline as well. So in terms of integrating ESG, underscoring our commitment against net zero, we are going to continue to report our GHG emissions, not just scopes 1 and 2, but also on scope 3 as well. Internally, we are developing our interim targets, the interim of the interim. So what happens now until 2030. On decarbonizing, yes, we are going to continue to engage our investee companies. Internally, we are now studying, studying on carbon budgeting and carbon pricing as well. Assurance, something that we may be doing soon. And then broader in terms of innovation and then nature, big topics. Climate adaptation is another one which we are going to focus on, given that I think we have a robust set of mitigation targets, but now we are going to focus a lot more on the risk side and adaptation side. Last slide is on labor rights. So labor is quite a big issue, globally as well, human rights or labor rights, which is why when we developed our labor rights policy, we looked at 6 key material issues guided by the ILO standards. So you can see them here, ranging from forced child labor down to upskilling and education. In terms of how do we channel it to our investee companies, we set out our expectations whereby they need to make sure that labor rights are taken into account when it comes to strategy, assessment, making sure that employees have access to grievance mechanisms, and then at the same time to establish clear policies in place. So again, on this labor front, we are still engaging our portfolio companies, and also the engagements will continue as we want to encourage better practices for them. Okay, so I think I've managed to wrap it up. Back to you, Shariza.
Thank you. Perfect. Thank you so much, Muazzam. To be honest, I actually got stumped at your first slide number 3, 236 billion dividend over 44 years. So that's about 5 billion every year. And then of course, I think one thing that came to mind really that you get your work cut out, right? The balancing act in terms of maintaining the ability to deliver such return because you've created the expectation over the years, right? And then still having to ensure the ESG adoption for sustainability. I can see your commitment in terms of balancing profitability, social investments, and you also talk about the triple bottom line stewardship model, right? And it seems one way of that is to really be proactive and the engagement with the investing companies. Quite glad to see your guiding principles when you talk about collective action and partnership. Perhaps that's something that we can discuss further later. And your point about principle of progress over perfection, right? We always say that perfection is also an excuse to procrastinate. but of course, at the end of the day, we've got all the deadlines being set by stakeholders, so we can't do that. And again, appreciate the transparency as well when you share the analysis on the greenhouse gas emission of your investment portfolio. So that's perhaps something that we can explore later as well. I think moving on to our next panelist, apologies, Serena and Jono, to keep you waiting. Perhaps to also have a bit more industry-wide view on innovation for transition finance by asset managers. Not sure whether Serena is back online. Shall we move to you, Serena?
Sure. Thanks for having me today. Hi. As mentioned, I'm Serena Lee, Manager of Investor Practice at Asia Investor Group on Climate Change, AIGCC for short. So as a quick introduction, AIGCC is an investor-led membership-based organization to create awareness and encourage action on climate and net zero investing. So in addition to service providers, our members include asset owners and asset managers who are either headquartered in Asia or with large investments in Asia. And to date, we have over 70 members across 11 markets, representing 33 trillion in AUM. So as a quick introduction, what I'd like to do is firstly begin by introducing AIGCC's 3 areas of work. And then in line with today's topic on the innovation approaches to transition, I'd like to introduce the Investor Climate Action Plan, and as well also touch on our work in relation to deforestation, again in line with Day 3's topic on nature and biodiversity. So just staying on this slide a little bit longer, AIGCC's area of work is broadly in 3 areas. This is investor practice, corporate engagement, and policy advocacy and regulatory engagement. Investor practice is where we are equipping investors with the knowledge and tools so that they can consider climate factors into their investment decisions. Corporate engagement, as you may have heard from Angelia earlier, these are where we're convening and supporting engagement initiatives, including Climate Action 100+, as well as the Asia Utilities Engagement Program, where we're bringing in different investors to come together to work with companies across different focus areas, across different sectors and regions on their decarbonization strategy. And thirdly, we have policy advocacy and regulatory engagement. So this is two things. First, we are responding to emerging consultations, whether it be on new taxonomies or guidance, to provide the Asia investor lens in mind. And secondly, we are also convening a number of roundtable discussions, bringing in industry stakeholders, including regulators, policymakers, investors, and companies, to come together in a space where they can discuss different climate themes, as well as close the gap on policy, corporate, and investor action. So in all of AIGCC's work, we have the Asia investor lens in mind, but also recognizing when we say Asia, it's actually a lot of different regional differences and market nuances that we need to consider. And this is important because it does impact how investors are thinking about or approaching their decarbonization or climate and nature journey. So as the next part of my presentation, I wanted to introduce the Investor Climate Action Plan, or in short, the ICAPS, which, in line again with today's session, is about bringing out the elements that investors, asset managers can adopt when it comes to considering transition planning and transition finance. So what are the ICAPS? ICAPS, in short, is a transition planning framework, and is designed for investors no matter where they're at in their climate journey, with a goal of reaching a 2050 net zero emissions economy. The ICAPS was developed by under the investor agenda across 7 network partners, including AIGCC, CDP, Ceres, IGCC, IIGCC, PRI, and UNFFI. The ICAPS are designed to provide investors with clear expectations, as well as navigate existing expectations on climate change initiatives. In terms of resources available, there are 3 documents on the Investor Agenda website, which include the ICAPS Expectations Ladder, the ICAPS documents, and the ICAPS case studies, which is case studies from global investors. So the ICAPS Expectations Ladder is a set of a summary of actions across 4 focus areas that you see on the second image in the slide. So this includes investment, corporate engagement, investor disclosure, and policy advocacy across an overarching theme of governance. And when we talk about a ladder, what we're essentially saying is for investors to adopt a 4-tiered approach, starting in tier 4, where the investors are just thinking about their climate plan and climate strategy, and then slowly increasing their ambition over time to get to tier 1, where they might be in a more leadership stage or being considered a net zero standard setter. The ICAPS guidance is the how on how to develop the actions across these different focus areas. So to keep up with investor best practice, the ICAPS documentations, particularly the expectations ladder and guidance, are updated every 2 years. So again, with today's theme on nature and biodiversity, the ladder was most recently updated in July 2023 of this year to include deforestation elements across all of its focus areas. So in the interest of time, I won't go into each of the focus areas, but here's a table that summarizes what the focus areas are, as well as providing a description into how it contributes to the climate action or climate planning. What you'll also see on the right-hand column are the subcategories. So the key message here is that when you're thinking about the different focus areas and thinking about how to set your action, there's actually a lot more granularity that you can think about. So for example, if we talk about investor disclosure, to create a robust and comprehensive investor disclosure, what you're looking at are clear expectations and communication on commitments, objectives and targets, as well as TCFD alignment and portfolio assessments as well. And the reason for doing this is so that you're communicating well with your stakeholders, your clients and beneficiaries in terms of your direction as asset managers or investors in general, so that there's a good allocation, a good market signal to the efficient allocation of capital. And as a more visual example, I've mentioned that the ICAPS expectations ladder is a four-tiered approach. So this example here is extracted from the investment focus area. Within that subcategory is target settings. So for investors just beginning in terms of setting their targets on climate and net zero, in tier 4, they might be measuring their greenhouse gas emissions across the portfolio. But then as they move across the ladder to increase their ambition, what you'll start to see is that the scope of coverage, as well as the different types of targets that are being set, becomes more sophisticated and detailed over time. And what the ICAPS expectation ladder does as well is that it signposts to different resources and initiatives available. So in the example of setting net zero targets, for asset managers, we support the Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative, or NZAM for short, as well as for asset owners, we look at Paris-aligned Asset Owners Initiative, as well as the UN Asset Owners Alliance. So again, in line with Day 3's theme on nature and biodiversity, I wanted to quickly mention the work that we're doing in deforestation. So firstly, in terms of ICAPS, I've mentioned that deforestation has been integrated across all focus areas of the ICAPS expectations ladder this year. And in response to investor interest in Asia, what we've also done at AIGCC is developed and launched a dedicated work stream on deforestation at the start of this year, initially as a 2-year program. So in the first year, it's very much internally focused on capacity building. What we found with a lot of investors was that there's a varying level of understanding for what the terms like deforestation and conversion actually means. So what we're trying to do is align the understanding, as well as provide investors with the tools and knowledge of initiatives available in the industry, and work on that towards the second year, where once the knowledge is more defined, that we can start looking at the implementation aspects of actions. So in relation to deforestation, in the second year, it might be activities like supporting investors with developing a no deforestation policy. So to explain, or again to highlight the innovation and approaches to transition, one of the key outcomes was to understand, what the skills are that you can build and how to build those skills. So at AIGCC, we are convening different working groups. Forest and land use is one of the 7 working groups that we have. We also convene or conduct master classes that deep dive into different climatic themes. And in all of this, we're bringing in subject matter experts on different thematic topics, and then also providing a forum for investors to share their experiences in terms of their existing activities, but also sharing all their challenges that they're currently facing. And this is helpful and important because it helps investors recognize that they're not alone in the climate or nature journey, and there's a lot of support that is available within the community itself. So as my ending slide, the key takeaways that I'd like to have for the audience is that, firstly, transition planning can be considered in terms of different elements. So we talked about the different focus areas that investors or asset managers can think about. And secondly, when you do think about these focus areas, there's a lot more detail that you can consider. So we talked about the subcategories within the ICAP's expectations ladder, and then also how to increase ambition over time through a four-tiered approach. So I'll now end my presentation here and pass it back to the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Serena. Brilliant. That excellent to see the collaboration, the effort to alleviate the level of adoption across the industry. I think she did mention in a presentation on the ICAP case studies. I think for those who have not seen that, quite useful because it covers the experiences adoption across different organizations globally, and also it covers some different asset managers, asset owners, insurance companies up to retirement funds. So do have a check out of that. And I thought the ICAP expectation ladder is also pretty inclusive because it provides that useful benchmark regardless of where the organization is in their level of adoption. I'm sure PNB and BNP Paribas is glad to see that they are in tier 4. Okay, I think now moving on to Jono to share with us, I think, on the solutions and tools available for low carbon transition. So Jono, perhaps you can help cover and enlighten us from that aspect of our topic today. Thanks, Jono.
Great, thanks a lot, everyone, and congratulations on making it to the end of day 3 and also the final presentation of the last session. So I'll try and keep this punchy and try and keep it informative for you. What I'm going to speak about is, when we consider the frameworks that, Serena was going through, where we really help is in that investment part of the story, as well as the engagement piece. So we provide ESG ratings and research, and we're also a stewardship service provider. So for those of you who don't know Sustainalytics, we have about 1,800 employees globally, and we have over 1,000 clients. So if you look at the top 20 asset managers globally by AUM, we work with about 18 of those. So we work with a lot of clients, and when we're talking about the low carbon transition, research and data is a central component to that. And I'm going to start by giving you a bit of an overview of the evolution that we've seen in terms of the analysis that's done at the company and the portfolio level when it comes to climate. Now, bear in mind that these kind of approaches are still in practice in the most advanced markets. So those who might be further down in terms of scenario analysis will still certainly be doing footprinting, for example. So worth bearing in mind. And indeed, we do see different countries and different regions globally at different spaces or places of their transition journey, right? So this is really an overview of what we see globally as the trend unfolding in terms of how asset managers can actually approach the climate transition in terms of data. So what we can see here on the slide is really the start or the birth of analyzing portfolios in terms of climate was certainly carbon footprinting, and this is measuring the emissions of a portfolio, and it can be done relative to the owned proportion of a company relative to EVIC, for example. So it can be considered something like owned emissions, right? And so really this was the start because it enabled asset managers to get a bit of a snapshot and to start to monitor their portfolios and even start to report on the emissions. Now, the next phase of the evolution was really in terms of starting to bring in some more nuanced metrics around carbon intensity, right? So when we're talking about carbon intensity, we're talking about measuring emissions that are relative. So that might be relative to $1 million of revenue, per $1 million of revenue rather, within your portfolio. And And we've also seen some more sophisticated intensity metrics come out. So for example, we see some industry focused intensity metrics. For example, the CO2 intensity per ton of steel output or per unit of cement produced, or other industry relevant metrics. And so why this is quite important is because there are some sectors which just by their very nature do have a lot higher of do have a lot more carbon emissions and therefore a lot higher carbon footprint, right? So this introduces a bit more of a nuanced view in the sense that, okay, so steel is very carbon intensive, but what is company A doing relative to company B in terms of how efficient they can make the production process, within current technology constraints? So what this allows asset managers to do is not just the kind of monitoring and reporting elements, but it really does start to bring in some nuance in terms of investment selection and decision making. You can start to find outliers within your portfolio. You can start to construct your portfolios that have lower carbon intensities. Now, moving into step 3, this is something that we've seen more recently in terms of measuring or analyzing a portfolio's alignment to Paris targets, i.e. to 1.5 degrees by 2050, right? And this is primarily looked at what corporates are disclosing in terms of their commitments and their targets to reach net zero. And it's starting to allow asset managers to analyze their portfolios in terms of temperature consequences. For example, an implied temperature rise. So analyzing the trajectory of holdings companies and what temperature we can expect the world to be by 2050 if all companies are kind of following a similar trajectory. We also see scenario analysis coming in at this stage, and this is really looking at how resilient a portfolio or how resilient holdings companies can be when we start to forecast some of the risks they're going to face moving forward. So that could be transition risks in terms of the policy pressures they're going to face going forward as governments globally begin to clamp down. It could be reputational as well. And also the physical risks themselves. So if we're going to have extreme heat events, how will that impact the output of factories? How will it impact operations if it's in areas prone to flooding? These types of analysis or analyses become important. So this becomes a lot more complicated, and it does tend to focus the analysis on more forward-looking figures. So it does become a lot more challenging at this stage. But the idea here is we're covering off not just reporting and monitoring of the portfolio and investment selection, but we're really looking at asset managers now starting to do transition and physical scenario analysis, looking at future risks and future opportunities. So what we've got here at step 4, and this is something I want to talk about today, is really assessing the implementation or assessing company action to actually meet those targets or those commitments that they're making. This is the natural next step that asset managers need to be looking at when we're talking about the low carbon transition. So as you can imagine, companies can set targets, they can set commitments, and then as the time comes around, it's possible that they won't meet those targets. And in fact, a lot of the research shows that a lot of companies already aren't on track to meet the targets that they're stating, right? So this means that asset managers need to actually start to interrogate these targets a bit further and start to look at what planning is actually being done. And I think this is particularly relevant this year I was at the PRI in-person event in Tokyo just a few weeks ago, and the slogan for that event was commitments into action. So we really see this as the next evolution of how asset managers can start to look, at least from a data perspective, at the climate transition. So why is it important to look beyond stated net zero targets or commitments? Well, we can look at a range of research, as I alluded to earlier before, but one report from Accenture from the end of last year found that of their research universe, only 7% of companies were on track to achieve their net zero targets for scope 1 and 2. So that's a pretty abysmal rate of attainment. If you look at research coming out of the Lazard Climate Center, they took a sample of large US corporations and they monitored them between 2010 and 2020, and they found that 72% of those firms have not reduced their emissions at a sufficient pace to meet their own targets. So this really starts to bring home why we need to start interrogating the actions of the companies that we're investing in. And just finally here, if we look at the facts in terms of what the IPCC are saying about the state of emissions globally, we do know that over the past decade, the greenhouse gas emissions are continuing to steadily rise, right? So we hear a lot about targets, but now it's really time to see some action and start to actually mitigate and abate some of these emissions if we're going to reach a 1.5 degree world. So you'll all be asking now, how can targets, right? How can the implementation of those targets be assessed, right? And from our perspective, this means analyzing company actions, or what we might call their management efforts to actually achieve their stated targets. So there are a range of different KPIs you can look at to see what companies are already doing today to start to put their plans into action. So there are some of the KPIs that we look at include capital allocation and its alignment to net zero, installation of climate leadership within the organization, including in the board, whether they have plans to decarbonize the products and services these companies are offering, whether director remuneration is actually linked to some of these targets, so there is someone accountable to them. And something very important as well is whether these companies have carbon price integration. So these are some of the elements that really is the next step of starting to critique investee companies and start to select and channel the capital towards the ones that are actually well equipped and starting to build plans and take action on their targets. So in terms of different frameworks for assessing management efforts and actions, there are a range of frameworks out there. Serena's sister organization, the IIGCC, has a net zero investment framework that contains 10 criteria, very specific criteria, to assess companies' transition risks. The TPI, the Transition Pathway Initiative, they've built a framework as well, and they've actually undertaken management assessments of the largest 600 companies in the world. And we at Morningstar Sustainalytics also have our own framework, which we call the Low Carbon Transition Rating. So I'll give you a very brief introduction as to what that does by looking at the chart to the right. So the this is basically showing emissions over time. And the baseline is the line at the very top of this graph. This is basically a business as usual scenario. So we're plotting the expected emissions of companies if they keep on track with what they've emitted over the last few years, and if they continue to maintain the same market share and so forth. And then what we're doing is actually analyzing, their management efforts in terms of many of these key KPIs. So we assess 85 different management indicators that indicate whether they've actually got a plan in place to start mitigating some of these future emissions. And what we can do is then model what we expect, or where we expect these companies to end up in terms of how much they will emit going forward based on their current plans. We call this the expected emissions trajectory, and you can see that here is the orange line in the middle. Now, the sobering reality, of course, is that there is a budget or a net zero target, right, which should be adhered to reach 1.5 degrees. And that here is represented by the blue line at the bottom. And as you can imagine, for most companies, we need to see a radical reduction in CO2 emissions in order to meet that 1.5 degree target. The scenario we use here is actually from the UN PRI, who have built through the Inevitable Policy Response Unit a 1.5 degree scenario, which we leverage, and then we allocate a budget regionally and for every company in our universe a certain amount of carbon which they can emit to get to net zero by 2050, and we compare that to what they're on track for. Right, and what we do tend to see in most cases is there is a gap between where they're headed based on current plans and where they need to be. And from this, we can derive an implied temperature rise, which isn't based purely on their targets, but it's based on their actual actions. So in this case, if every company in the world were to miss their emissions budget to the same extent as this example company, we could expect to have global temperatures rise by 2.4 degrees. So my final slide is just to give you some of the examples of some of the data points that we are looking at when we're looking at action and putting plans into practice. So some examples here are whether they're innovating in terms of low carbon technologies, whether they've actually got a greenhouse gas reduction program for their supply chain, and then downstream, so talking about scope 3 as well, whether they've got a product and service decarbonization plan, critically, whether they have integrated a carbon price. And these are just a few examples of 85 different metrics that we monitor. So that's the end of my presentation, but I hope that was helpful and informative to give you a bit of an idea of the evolution of, I guess, practices for looking at the low carbon transition from a data and research perspective, and where we can all sort of aim to be over the coming years as we need to start seeing some real action from these plans.
Sure.
Thank you very much. Over to you on the ground.
Yeah. Thanks, Jono. I don't know whether that's a big statement to say it's no longer enough for investors to rely on net zero targets. I'm not sure whether that concerns the asset managers here. But brilliant. I think there's a lot of detailed analysis that you've shared, which I'm sure is going to be very important as you need more granular data moving forward. We've got another 20 minutes. I think what I'll do is my concern of going straight to the panel, the audience Q&A, is the fact that most of the questions are for PNB. I'm not sure whether you've got a lot of unique holders here that's concerned with your presentation earlier. Well, rather than maybe I'll just quickly, maybe ask one question each to panelists to cover 2 to 3 minutes before we go to the audience Q&A. I think similar to one of the questions from the audience, I think about product. Angelia, you mentioned earlier, right? Your 2023 plus focusing on some of the more ESG aligned product for your investors. Is that something that can expand further in terms of what you've seen so far? What works, what's been in demand for those that you've launched in terms of the performance, the outcome, perhaps some light on that. Yeah, thanks, Angelia.
Yeah, thank you. I think in terms of product, we are clearly developing products, as I mentioned, aligned to how we want to bring capital to achieve the net zero commitment, number one. Number two is also to capture the opportunities given the need of everybody to achieve the net zero targets. But I'll first talk about some of the products as an example, trying to tell the story of why there are opportunities for investors. But to be honest, in Asia, we do have some of these products in Asia. It's really rather challenging to sell sustainable thematic themes in Asia. One is because maybe we have abundance of many things. It's very easy for us to switch on our lights where it doesn't really cost us a lot. Unlike in Europe, when you switch on your electricity, it costs you a lot of money. Water, especially like in Malaysia, it's, my water bill in Malaysia was about 30 ringgit, but my water bill in Singapore is a few hundred Singapore dollars. Even though I'm trying to restrict, the use of water. And then when we talk about food, we have so much abundance of food in Asia that there's so much wastages that sometimes we don't really, maybe on the retail side, understand why is there a need for me to buy an energy transition team or looking at a smart food team. They like digital, because we all use phones, we all have AI, but maybe they say, I don't want, maybe it's not that like an urgency to do good. Unlike in Europe, there is like, we want to deploy my money. I want to make sure the money that I invest in has an impact. It's the mindset is a little bit different for investors in this part of the world. But I think what I want to share is we have so much conversation that we all talk about the urgency of what we all need to take in terms of action to achieve net zero. So, and how many signatories are already signed on to net zero, and what that means in terms of the risk to business if we take it as business as usual. We don't want to be stuck in what we call a Kodak moment, right? Continue to invest because we see that, it doesn't impact. But I think it's important when we understand policymakers are making regulations, taxonomies are coming to capital market. It is a reality that all this clearly needs to be addressed. If we don't, there is a risk to investments if they don't change in terms of coming out with proper climate plans or policies for the way they conduct business and move towards a lower zero emission operations, right? So that actually has a risk because if they continue to invest or continue to operate like that, the banks are going to pull out lines or, it's going to cost you more money to continue to operate. Your business might not be insurable anymore. And number third, asset managers like ourselves who are signed on to net zero, we cannot continue to invest into your company if you are a high emitter, right? So that's number one, that risk if you need to do business as usual. The second part is then the opportunity. When we see all these things that are coming out, we talk a lot about EVs, and we can see in the streets of Kuala Lumpur, we have not yet seen many charging stations that are lining the streets. Now that is an opportunity because that moment will come. Because policies are going to change where if you drive a fossil fuel car, it's going to cost you more because the tax for fossil fuel cars is going to increase. That means people will move towards driving more EVs. So that means you need more EV infrastructure as a simple example. So, and we're talking about how much regulations is coming to enforce a change in as an example of EVs. Those are what we call opportunities. So if we are able to see that opportunities that we need to build so many EV cars, or we need how many EV batteries that needs to come out and how much EV charging stations, then you will see an energy transition team actually creates opportunities for investors. Because these companies today that are offering solutions today are going to deploy their solutions to basically meet this demand. So that means the companies today has a potential to grow 20, 30 times of what they are delivering today, right? So if you look at that, then clearly those are opportunities. While we want to channel capital towards those teams, we want to also let investors see that there are clearly opportunities of investing into those kind of teams as an example.
Sure. Thanks, Angelia. I think quickly moving on to Muazzam, I'm not going to ask what's the dividend going to be the next 10 years. You shared earlier, right, on your slides on the GHG greenhouse gas emission for your portfolio, 86% of that from 4 sector. And you've also shared the fact that PNB is a major investor across the board. So given the diversity of the industry in Malaysia, how is PNB tailoring your strategies, right, for these various sectors? Any success story in terms of some sector-specific initiatives that PNB has deployed today?
Yeah, thanks, Rizal. So it's still work in progress. I think it's only about 18 months ago that we first published our sustainability framework. But again, when we look at how are we going to decarbonize our portfolio, we look at what do we do with the existing investments, and then how do we approach new investments. So when it comes to existing investments, as I mentioned, we are able to focus our efforts to address over 80% of emissions just by engaging the 4 sectors. And again, two of the top companies alone about 60% of emissions. So you see earlier, the highest one would be in the plantation sector. You can guess what company that is. Again, we are comforted with the fact that that company has committed itself to be an SBTI aligned company in terms of their net zero target. So for the most part, they will be aligned with the Paris Agreement, right? Secondly, the utility company, again, you can guess what company that is. The lights are on because of them. I know BNPP has targets against coal, but please don't shut your doors towards that company. But again, engagements are still ongoing with them. And as you know, they have set their sustainability pathway 2050. But you also know that given the recent launch of the NETR recently by the government, 9 out of I think 14 initiatives will involve that organization. And you can see the growth of renewable energy. It's going to be a main pillar of NETR as we need to grow our renewable energy to 13 gigawatts by 2030. So that's in a nutshell on the existing side. On the new side, our efforts in terms of integrating, yes, there are various industries. In a way, we'll be able to master, what are the key material factors when it comes to all of the industries that we invest in. But again, at the end of the day, how do you assess those, right? Which is why we've developed our own internal ESG assessment tool, and we use it together with an external ESG ratings as well. And again, the work will still continue, and just keep us in the loop for further progress down the road.
Thanks, Muazzam. Hopefully that gives some comfort to some of your unit holders here. Probably moving quickly to Serena. I think maybe just one question with regards to what you've observed in terms of the appetite of investors and governments to engage in Asia. I think to collaborate and to enhance the adoption of the ESG initiatives. Very quickly, Serena, if you can address that.
Sure. Thanks for the question. So I think earlier in the presentation, I mentioned 2 areas of work, which we do in relation to policy and advocacy engagement. So firstly, there is the appetite, I would say, for investors and regulators to engage. And we're doing this in terms of responding to emerging guidance and taxonomies that are coming out of different markets, by providing the Asia investor lens. So in doing so, we are aligning or closing the gap in any understanding that is necessary. The second type of activity I mentioned is in relation to roundtable discussions, where we're bringing in industry stakeholders, including regulators, policymakers, investors, and companies, to come together to close the gap on actions that can be taken across the stakeholders. And one specific example of this is through the Asia Utilities Engagement Program, one of our corporate engagement programs where we held energy roundtable discussions in Indonesia, Malaysia, and Japan this year. And I think what's important to recognize is that in all of these roundtable discussions, the priorities and the topics of focus vary. And it's important to recognize that, again, there's the market nuances and regional differences that need to be considered in terms of the engagement. So I'll maybe stop there and in the interest of time.
Thanks, Rina. Maybe Jono, last question for you. When it comes to ESG integration, for sure that there could be some impact on pricing the investments, right? From your experience, how can the asset managers incorporate such ESG risk assessment into the valuation of those potential deals, especially during the brown industry transition?
Yeah, for sure. And, depending on particularly the size of the asset manager in question, we see varying levels of integration in terms of using these kind of signals to build valuation models. So I think, there are some quant houses out there that like to do, use AI and a lot of statistical analysis to try and find a kind of, secret source of the most material factors. But a lot of the risks that we're looking at are long-term, right, and future risks. When we're talking about, transition risk or indeed physical climate risk, so specifically in the climate space, there is a lot of data out there that are projecting certain scenarios, and then that can be factored in terms of expected carbon emissions times by a carbon price, right? And that's one kind of more simple way of getting the impact on financials. There are also other slightly more sophisticated signals that speak to, for example, value at risk, so VAR for short, that companies will face, for given scenarios of more or less intense climate impacts, for example, and that actually gives you an indication of, whether it be revenue, lost revenue, or losses in terms of actual assets, for example, in areas that might be susceptible to flooding, or the ability of factories to operate in extreme heat, as just a couple of examples.
Thanks, Jono. I think we are down to our last 8 minutes. Perhaps I can take this one question, although it's specific to PNB, but maybe I can generalize this question. This question is about PNB share how you balance the delicate act between annual dividend expectations and having portfolio sustainability targets. I think it's quite generic. I can also expand it to everyone, to the panelists, right? At the end of the day, is it a myth? Is there a trade-off? When you approach ESG, can it be balanced at all? Or if you focus on ESG, that itself can create that alpha, right, when it comes to the return. So this question is specific to PNB, but again, I think feel free, the panel, to
I feel
share.
like I need to be the one to answer that one first. Probably parts of the 15 million unit holders are in this room. Again, indeed, there needs to be a balancing act between short-term and long-term targets. At the end of the day, PNB is a long-term investor. If you look at how assets have been repriced lately, globally, you can see there's a big shift towards greener assets. Companies which are brown are moving to be olive green and then green. So various shades of green. You're going to see companies transitioning to be that in the future. But companies who miss out, that's when there's increased risk of value destruction. So as long-term investors, we want to be value accretive. At the same time, we believe that for corporates, it will be beneficial for them in the long run. Companies who embrace this net zero transition. From a cost side, with the advent of technology and advancements, carbon capture and whatnot, you can see cost savings. And then on the growth side, there's a lot of opportunities that companies must at least capture. You can see, I think the McKinsey report says that annually there will be additional 3.5 trillion in terms of green investments. Malaysia alone needs like 180 billion worth of renewable energy investments to meet its climate targets. So you can see it's a lot about value accretion as well over the long run. And again, climate risk is a form of business risk, and business risk is a form of investment risk. So companies need to have that long-term view.
He has
That's it.
answered it all. So we say about risk mitigation and we talk about opportunities. So that's basically what it is, right?
Juno, Serena, is there anything to add?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's a good question, and I would maybe point to the ICAPs again. So there are elements, particularly within governance, that could help with, thinking about the long-term aspects of value creation that was mentioned. And then there are other activities that can be considered, whether it's corporate engagement or policy advocacy, which I think is necessary and important to close the gap, as we consider activities in the long term as well.
Okay, thanks. Maybe we can take one more question. I think this perhaps a bit more generalized. I think the question is, there's a statement first, lack of supply in ESG related investment instruments here. I'm not sure whether you agree. What can we do? I mean, anyone, I suppose. Lack of supply in ESG related investment instruments here. Again, whether your view that's the case, and then what can we do?
I don't think there's really lack of investment instruments. There are sukuks that are green, also green bonds as well that's issued locally. That's one. Equities, it's again talking about how we integrate ESG and create a product that's more ESG integrated. I've seen quite a few banks here have launched sustainable products working with global asset managers like ourselves and others as well. So there are quite a few of sustainable funds already that it's available through the banks. Like I say, the challenge is we've not seen the kind of asset gathering as strong as we would like to see. One I feel is, again, that alignment on whether you see the opportunities in investing in a sustainable fund, or you think that you're just doing good but not looking at the opportunity. So I feel probably it's that, yeah.
3 minutes to 4:30. I guess we pretty much covered quite a fair bit on the topic. Again, because we are a small audience here, unless you have a burning question that I've not asked, feel free to put up your hands since we've got another 3 minutes to burn. So with that, I guess we can end the session. Thank you so much for your participation. I appreciate that. And again, warm applause to the panelists for such an excellent insights and sharing. Thank you.